Hello everybody, it is April 12th, 2025 here in the United States of America. In today's video I want to talk about Donald Trump's meeting with the comedian Bill Maher that apparently took place at the White House, I believe last night. I didn't know that this meeting was going to take place. I'm not really sure who set it up. From what I understand, Donald Trump was a little hesitant about it. Donald Trump and Bill Maher have not exactly said kind things about each other in the past. For those of you who don't know, Bill Maher is I don't want to say leftist, because Bill Maher doesn't necessarily align currently with the leftist ideologues that are in the Democrat Party. He's a bit more of a pragmatist, definitely on the left wing of American politics. I would call him a more classic progressive. Now, I don't agree with everything Bill Maher says. He's still within the clearly left-wing spectrum of American politics, but he's not a politician, he's a comedian, but he is a fairly popular figure amongst classic progressives, and actually many centrists and also some right-wing people do have an affinity to Bill Maher, simply because there are certain issues where he has reasonable takes on that people within those political spheres would actually agree with, surprisingly. There are some right-wing people that find themselves agreeing with Bill Maher, and centrists that find themselves agreeing with Bill Maher on things like border security and maybe certain foreign policy issues. And then also some more common sense things like gender ideology and men being in women's sports and vice versa. Now, was this a good move politically for Donald Trump to accept this invitation and meet with a prominent figure in the opposing political camp? I would say yes, it is a good idea, and I think this is something that Donald Trump should do more of. Now, remember, Donald Trump isn't just the president of registered Republicans or anyone that voted for him. Donald Trump is the president of the United States. That includes all of its citizens, and it would be in Donald Trump's best interests to make inroads where he can with the more reasonable sect of progressive politics. The same one that people like Jimmy Dore belong to. Again, Jimmy Dore and Bill Maher don't agree on everything, but again, they sort of fall in line with that classic progressive political camp, so to speak. And what I mean by classic progressive, I hate to use the term woke. I guess you could say non-woke progressives that understand that the extreme social causes that many other former colleagues have taken up aren't things that are reasonable things that should be introduced into society, that are fairly destructive, unpopular, and will be nothing but a hindrance to the party that many of them still belong to, the Democratic Party. If you look at the polling done in the United States, many of these social causes are really only popular amongst a very small segment of the population. Generally speaking, most people kind of fall in the middle to the right on things like gender ideology, certain aspects of like DEI policy, on pushing certain things in schools. Should children be exposed to ideologies around sexuality? Have certain progressive causes gone too far, or have certain things become more of a detriment to society and a hindrance to society than anything else? Classic progressives tend not to be in favor of open borders, which is interesting because this is the position that Bernie Sanders used to have, because it was the classic progressive position that open borders would be something that would hurt American workers and drive down wages. Also, too, open borders is looked at as something that is in many ways a policy in favor of industrialists and certain people in favor of an economy just centered around making money rather than taking care of the native populace. Birth rates fall, so therefore to keep production going and to keep making money, workers must be imported. Even if it's to the detriment to the people already living somewhere, well, profits mean more than people. So because many progressives, classic progressives, are I don't want to say full-on anti-capitalist, but definitely against the excesses of capitalism and free markets. Many classic progressives, I don't think, would call themselves Marxists and Leninists. They wouldn't quite go that far. Bill Maher definitely falls within that camp. Now, many classic progressives actually have I don't want to say a completely favorable view of Donald Trump, but definitely don't have the extreme seething hatred towards him that I would say neoliberal globalists have. Now, the more extreme camp that occupies much of the Democratic hierarchy now, it's really hard to pin down what exactly I would call them. I wouldn't really call them progressives. It's not fair to classic progressives to mix them in because they disagree on so much. They're essentially political and social extremists. I would call them neoliberal globalists, I suppose. We'll just call them that. I don't even really feel comfortable calling them Marxists and Leninists. While they might agree with some aspects of Marxism and Leninism and perhaps even Stalinism, I have a very strong feeling that even somebody like Stalin would see them as a detriment to society rather than a benefit. Well, their policies and the things they advocate for. I think they go much further in many regards than Marxists and Leninists of the past, especially on completely deconstructing societies and making sure there's no standards, no culture, no moral standard, no hierarchy in any way, shape, or form. They take all that to the absolute most extreme position that you can. And somebody like Jimmy Dore or Bill Maher, I'd say don't fall in that camp. Well, some people would say that their positions are detrimental to society. I would say not quite as. If they do have any kind of detrimental effect on society or raises or things that raise concern with people that might oppose certain things that they believe, it's not quite as extreme and urgent as some of the things proposed by neoliberal globalists. I would disagree with quite a few things pushed by classic progressives, but not in the same visceral way that I would disagree with a leftist, globalist, neoliberal. But anyways, getting back to the topic. It is a good idea for Trump to make inroads with these people, although he is going to get a lot of direct criticism from somebody like Jimmy Dore or Bill Maher, especially on things like with Jimmy Dore, Trump's main issue would be being critiqued over foreign policy, especially in regards to the Israel and Palestine conflict. Many progressives favor an American foreign policy that's non-interventionist, that doesn't interfere or interject in other nations' affairs, which, funny enough, is actually, I'd say, the pretty common MAGA position when it comes to foreign policy. Trump's base. One of the things that Trump really became popular on was he was one of the first Republicans, especially with his position and popularity, to speak out against the Iraq War and say it was a terrible and foolish mistake. And that's a fairly popular Republican opinion now. Generally speaking, many Republicans that aren't neoconservatives, that are more of the on the populist side of things, want an American foreign policy that focuses on America, focuses on our immediate sphere of influence, and that isn't as aggressive as it was under the last few administrations. Now, America is still one of the preeminent world powers along with Russia and China, so America's foreign policy will never be completely benevolent. You can't be a nation that holds that kind of position in the world and have a foreign policy that pleases everyone and is 100% benevolent. You can mitigate the abuses of your foreign policy and make it a bit more peaceable, less chaotic, less likely to cause death and destruction. But it's never going to be perfect. And many people within both the classic progressive camp and the MAGA camp want a foreign policy that dials back on militarism overseas, that dials back on having so many bases in places around the world that cause needless conflict. So I think it's good for Donald Trump to meet with somebody like Bill Maher and address issues that he may have, which many classic progressives that don't quite, that at this point wouldn't vote for the current Democratic Party and would prefer to vote for somebody that falls more in line with what they would want. It's good for Trump to make inroads with those people. Now, while this might be Trump's last term in office, despite what he's saying about running for a third term, I think that's bluster. I don't see Trump actually running for a third term. In America, that's insofar as American political tradition, it's generally always been presidents serve 2 terms. And after the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt, not Theodore Roosevelt, FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, it was enshrined into law that a president can only serve 2 terms. I mean, that's 8 years. It's a long time to be in power. I mean, America does essentially select a king every 8 years. The presidency has a lot of power, and yes, it's probably a good idea for that particular person to only serve 8 years. But what Trump can do is set up his own party for the midterms. He can ensure that many of these centrist progressives might vote Republican, although they might not agree with every Republican stance. I think, again, the MAGA camp and the centrist progressive camp actually does have a good bit in common, too. I mean, many MAGA people, if you will, aren't exactly huge fans of mega corporations and corporations in general. They aren't fans of Wall Street. They're not fans of what happened to the Rust Belt, to the American steel industry. They're far more pro-worker. While there's certain... MAGA doesn't necessarily have this negative opinion of all billionaires. I think MAGA, as a political movement, looks at millionaires and billionaires a bit more pragmatically. Like, if you're somebody with a lot of wealth and power and you're serving the interests of your country, then they would approve of that person. If somebody has a lot of wealth and power and they're, doing things that harm their country, well, then they wouldn't support that person. They're not going to just not support someone because that person has a lot of money. Now, many progressives don't like the fact that people can become millionaires and billionaires. They're not comfortable with Elon Musk and other wealthy people in positions of power having influence over the American government, which I understand, again, because lobbyists are a thing. You have people that own large stake in industries with a lot of money and a lot of power and influence that can get that industry preferential and special treatment to the detriment of other Americans and competitors within that industry. I definitely understand that sentiment that progressives have towards millionaires and billionaires, but I think while MAGA is aware and cognizant of a bit more so, just one thing I want to elaborate on. So Republicans of the past, especially in the Bush era, generally didn't really have any open animosity towards the excesses of capitalism, didn't really have any open animosity towards millionaires and billionaires for the most part. That's kind of how the Republican Party sort of became known as the party of the rich, the party of the corporation, the party of corporate tax breaks and whatnot. But the current iteration of the Republican Party and the direction that Donald Trump has taken it has taken on a much more populist bend, where it's becoming American worker first over all else, American interest first above all else. If there's certain sectors of the economy that are hampering the prosperity of the country, then I think many people in MAGA would be willing to have that section of the economy regulated in a way that would keep, or if not outright regulated, I think they would approve of incentives to keep certain companies, corporations within the country, to keep factories within the country, to keep businesses within the country, rather than outsource everything, which I think many progressives would probably agree with. But to get back to Trump, it is a good idea for Trump to have productive meetings with these people, to invite them to the White House. Again, because Trump isn't the president of just registered Republicans, Trump is the president of all Americans. And I think a surprising amount of people across the American political spectrum, if they actually met with Donald Trump, if they actually sat down and listened to him talk without the grandiose... Here's the thing about Trump. When Trump's in front of a camera, Trump plays up certain parts of his personality. It's an act. It's part of his brand, if you will. Kind of how he sells himself. Almost like a professional wrestling persona. I believe it is him. He's being himself, but he's dialing up certain aspects of his personality to 10 for his own reasons. And it seems like in private, Trump is a bit more reserved, much more pragmatic, much more reasonable to deal with, much friendlier. As long as Trump has shown a modicum of respect and people treat him well, it seems like Trump is fairly gracious with people on the other side of the political spectrum. I think Trump is pretty well fed up, which I don't blame him, with the not progressive fringe, but the neoliberal leftist fringe of the Democratic Party. Let's be honest, many of them wish him dead or in prison. Now he knows that, so I don't really think that he's going to have a good relationship with those people at any point, but he definitely can have a good relationship with the centrist progressives and libertarians in this country. Now, he is going to face a lot of criticism from these people, and Bill Maher expressed that he did criticize Trump to his face over things like the Iran deal, and talking about running for a third term, and some of his other more crass statements and things that he's done. And it seemed like Trump took those criticisms to heart and didn't become irate or upset over them. I think Trump in this term privately is a bit more reserved now, especially with the assassination attempt against him, with him almost dying. I think he's a little more humble from what it seems, but it is in his interest. And that was my cat that just flew by. Oh boy, she's got the zoomies. It's in his interest, though, to make inroads with the centrist progressives and at least get them on board with the several things that MAGA and them have in common. Because Trump has made a pretty concerted effort to excise neoconservatism from the Republican Party. I don't think neoconservatism is going to make a comeback at any point soon, and the Democratic Party is hemorrhaging voters left and right because of the Democratic Party's refusal to actually implement and embrace pragmatic policies that benefit Americans, and they're just doubling down on the extreme social causes and social ideologies that many Americans no longer support. So it would be smart for Donald Trump to maybe broaden the tent, so to speak, of his version of the Republican Party and bring these people in, have good relationships with them, bring them to the White House, speak with them. Now, they're not going to agree with everything that Donald Trump does. I certainly don't. There's many policies that Donald Trump has that especially foreign policies, our relationship to Israel, I think is, again, I'm not saying anything specifically about the country of Israel, but I think we should rethink our relationship with Israel. I think we should rethink our relationship with much of the Middle East. I think we should rethink our antagonistic relationship with certain countries like Iran. I feel like we're always unfortunately one step away from being pulled back into another endless war in the Middle East. And then some of his domestic policies I don't necessarily agree with. I think sometimes it's best to deal with things with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. But it's pretty early on in his presidency to tell where some of these things are going to go. And I think many people, because of the alternative, I think would support this current populist iteration of the Republican Party, even if they don't agree with the entire platform, because the alternative to them is just nothing but like repeated failed policies, incompetent governance, corruption, rot, belligerent and incoherent foreign policy. And people can say what they want about Trump's foreign policy. I think Biden's foreign policy under whoever ran that administration was foolish, belligerent, completely chaotic, and it was just stumbling around in the dark, trying to throw American power around and to get some kind of good result. And because of that, we were on the verge of a nuclear exchange with Russia. I think we were much closer, one mistake away from essentially the end of the world than many people would like to admit. And a lot of that was thanks to the absolutely stupid foreign policy of the previous administration. Not to go off track here, but you have the three preeminent world powers that generally call the shots: Russia, China, and the United States. And any one of the three outright antagonizing the other to the point where they're more or less giving target information to a country that one of those major powers is at war with, for targeted strikes on that country's territory, supplying the weaponry for those strikes is just insanity. We definitely did not do that in the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Despite the competing ideologies of the time, Western capitalism versus communism, Marxism, and Leninism. There were still enough pragmatic people in power on both sides to realize that doing things like that is just unnecessary and inflammatory and will just lead to us all dying. I think some of the people in the former administration were so ideologically possessed, naive, and foolish, and just flat out stupid that they didn't really comprehend the danger they were putting themselves and all of us in. I think despite the faults in Trump's foreign policy, I think it's run by much more reasonable people in regards to understanding how precariously close to destroying ourselves we can come. But yeah, anyways, back to what I was saying with Trump meeting with people like Maher. It doesn't hurt Trump's popularity. It doesn't hurt Trump with his base. It makes Donald Trump look friendly, approachable, willing to talk to the other side. It makes those Americans that are very uncomfortable with the current Democratic Party a bit more comfortable with Trump despite his rhetoric. And then hearing that Donald Trump in private, once he drops the Donald Trump public persona, is a much more reasonable, pragmatic, and thoughtful person. I think once people hear that, they become a bit more comfortable with the man, and perhaps even Donald Trump publicly can become a bit more like that. I suppose maybe he would be more comfortable dropping some of that, or dialing back some of those aspects of his personality, and to be a bit more like what he said to be in private publicly. But I think one of the reasons why he doesn't is because Trump is surrounded by enemies that people want him dead, or people that want him dead or in prison, and he knows that. So Trump is always on the attack. He's always on the offensive because he feels like he has to be, even more so than he was in his first term. Because again, these people tried to kill him. He knows that. Let's be honest here. The guy that shot at Donald Trump in Butler, PA, he didn't do that on his own accord. And there's a reason why the investigation was shut down pretty quickly. And the other one down at Mar-a-Lago, the guy that had connections to the Ukrainian government. Trump does that. I think, again, he acts the way that he does in public, partly because of his brand, but also partly because he feels like he has to. He has to weed out and destroy, not outright destroy, but weed out and isolate the people that want to do him and his family harm. But anyways, that's all for this video today. I'll be back with another one Wednesday. I hope everyone has a great week, and see you then.